Hello, we're on to the next week of Journeying with Joseph, and we get into some interesting things in today's notes that we're going to be looking at. So, if you want to have a read of the chapter of Genesis 42 in my Bible, it's called Joseph's Brothers Go to Egypt, and a lot happens in this chapter. So, please, if you haven't read it, before you've started watching this, have a pause right now and have a quick read through the chapter. Things are starting to get rather interesting now for Joseph as we see his old life and his new life come together. His own family are starting to suffer from the famine, and so Jacob sends some of Joseph's brothers to Egypt to get grain, to get food for the family. And as we saw in the previous chapter, right at the end, where it said that this famine wasn't just going to affect Egypt, it was going to affect the world. And we're now seeing this play out as we see it's affecting the land of Canaan as well. But not all the brothers went. Benjamin, the youngest, stayed at home. Jacob wanted to protect him. And the other brothers set out for Egypt, not knowing that it's actually going to be Joseph that they're going to ask for food. And again, we learn in the last chapter, Joseph's now got a new name that Pharaoh's given him. He's now governor of Egypt. And 13 years have passed. And I don't know about you, but if I look back at photos now of me 13 years ago, let alone that period of time from kind of being a teenager through to adulthood, how much you change of how you look, change your hairstyle, all that kind of thing. He will have looked so different. He will have not been the Joseph that they knew, and he's got a different name. He's in a different situation. He would have probably looked to them as a stranger would. No part of them would have thought, that is our brother Joseph. And so they come before him, and they do not recognize or realize it's Joseph, but Joseph recognizes them straight away, but doesn't let on. And I've always found that quite a difficult or strange situation. What would I do? What would you do if you were in Joseph's position at this point in time? You're in a new country, virtually a new identity, new name, new family, and here your past comes right before your eyes, is returning to you. And we even mentioned last week, didn't we, in chapter 41, about Joseph calling his oldest child Manasseh, meaning God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. So he declared in the last chapter that that past has gone. He's forgotten it. God has helped him to move on, to leave that past, that pain behind. And right here, right now, out of the blue, suddenly, all of his brothers, bar one, are there in front of him. The brothers that sold him into slavery, that wanted him gone. That harsh reminder must have been right there for him out of the blue of the past coming back. And I don't know, but it made about you, but it made me think, how many times do I think I've dealt with stuff from my past or things that have happened and I think I've let them go, and then out of the blue they suddenly come back, don't they? Or you remember something, or you have a dream, or something sparks a memory off of things that you think you've dealt with and things that you think you've moved on from. And in verse 9, in chapter 42, we read that Joseph even starts to remember the dreams he had as a teenager, those dreams that of perhaps God foretelling him, is how we read it now, isn't it? God foretelling him of what was going to happen, of what was to come in his life. And it's all coming back to Joseph. The hurt, the anger. And we read in some of the description in how it describes here of how Joseph speaks to his brothers, of what that makes him feel, of how he speaks to them harshly and then accuses them of being spies. What would I do if that was me? Part of me wonders, would I do exactly as Joseph, not let on as to who I was and see how it plays out? Or would I be completely honest and say, brothers, don't you realise it's me? Really hard, isn't it? He must have been in such shock at seeing them, such shock of thinking perhaps he'd never see his family again. And here they are right in front of him. And to be honest, I kind of think he's fairly measured in how he is, because the other part of me thinks, how angry would I have been? Do you not know what you did? Why did you do that? Do you know what my life has been like for 13 years? Captivity, slavery. You've no idea what you did that day and what it did to me. And Joseph yet seems quite measured, doesn't he, in how he is? A bit of harshness, but overall, actually not that bad in how he's treating them and what he's saying. But Joseph starts to use what he knows. He knows they're not all there. He knows Benjamin is missing. And so he starts to question his brothers on their lives. And he sees that actually they start to be quite honest. They say, yes, we've got another brother. And actually, there was another brother again, but he is no more, because in their eyes, Joseph is lost. Joseph is dead. The likelihood of Joseph being alive to them is really unlikely. And so Joseph decides to test them further, and he puts them in custody, saying he wants to see the younger brother. And I wonder why. Why does Joseph do this? Yes, he's spoken harshly. He's maybe been a little harsh in accusing them of being spies when he knows they won't be, when he knows they're there because they need food. Yet he puts them in custody as he's been in custody. Is it a way of revenge? Maybe it's to see, have they changed over these years? How are they living now? Are they living more truthfully, more honestly? Are they treating each other better? And then we get this 3 days. So at the start of the 3 days, Joseph says, I'm not letting any of you go. Your younger brother needs to come. And 3 days pass. Who knows what happens in those 3 days? I really wonder what turmoil Joseph was maybe going through in terms of thinking, what do I do here? What is the right thing to do? Such a mix of emotions over those days that he must have been going through. And then we come to 3 days later, and he lets them out. He starts to show some mercy, some grace. But he keeps Simeon. He keeps one brother behind. But he sends the rest off with grain, with food, not wanting the family to starve, not wanting to see that happen. But says he's keeping Simeon until the younger brother comes and they return with him. And I find it really interesting when we read the brothers' interaction here. Immediately, their response to this happening is what they did to Joseph. 13 years has passed, and they see this as being a punishment for what they did to Joseph without knowing Joseph is the one who is exerting the punishment, as it were. There's infighting, and we see Reuben almost comes out with this, well, I told you so. I told you we should have listened. I told you we should have done something different. And Joseph hears it all. And it tells us, doesn't it? He turns away weeping. Joseph starts to see that the brothers realise what they did was wrong, that they realise they shouldn't have done to him what they did. And the chapter continues, and it tells us about Joseph hiding silver, and the money that they paid he puts back in their bags, and they go back home, and when they find the silver, they're thinking, God, what are you doing? Joseph's actions is leading them to question God, to see where God is in all this, which I find quite interesting as well. And then Jacob's response as they get home, that even though one of his sons is now in captivity, Jacob will not let them return with Benjamin. His heart has become hard. almost he's not seeing reality, because in Jacob's eyes, he has now lost two sons, Simeon and Joseph, and doesn't want to add Benjamin to that list. The past is impacting Jacob and how he's seeing things. We see in this chapter so much hurt, so much of a reality, of facing reality over the past. We see Joseph remembering his dreams, seeing his family again, but with those dreams, perhaps remembering God's faithfulness to him over these years. The hurt and the pain of this family makes me think, wow, how real is this situation? It may not be exactly selling your brother into slavery like any of us might be able to perhaps identify with exactly, but the hurt, the pain, past situations of family, of friends that are all part of who we are. We might think we've dealt with it, but maybe we haven't. And we see this family facing past decisions and circumstances. We see Joseph's pain as he's hit again with the past and what these 13 years have been to him. But we also see some hope, because we see Joseph starts to deal with his family with compassion, starts to relent, allows most of his brothers home bar one, sends them with food, with money. He's starting to walk the road of forgiveness. And then we look at Jacob and we see how much the past has hurt him, the bitterness, the pain that he is still holding on to. That means he's not perhaps looking at the situation in front of him in the best way. He's living in that pain. He's living in that disappointment. Forgiveness is a hard journey. Forgiveness doesn't mean we forget the things that have happened to us. And it doesn't necessarily mean restoration of relationship, but it does mean we stop letting hurt and bitterness have a hold over us. It is a hard journey to walk, and it's one that doesn't just happen. We have to choose to walk it. Joseph is hurting. We can see that in his response. But he's choosing to walk towards forgiveness. He's choosing to walk towards not letting the past have a hold on him any longer. And as hard as it is, what a great example for us to look at. I want to encourage you today. Let us be a bit more like Joseph, ready to walk towards forgiveness, choosing to walk towards forgiveness, knowing it won't necessarily be an easy or a quick road for us to walk down, but knowing, as Joseph does, that God is faithful, that God is with us in it, and that he will give us all we need to show grace and mercy to those around us. Be encouraged today. Let's choose forgiveness. God bless.